Hey guys, it's Mathel here once again, and this will be the conclusion video for the Essence Drain character that I started about a week ago and ended up playing for, well, about 24 hours I suppose. It didn't end up getting too much playtime in the end, simply because the AoE nerfs for Contagion were kind of a bit too much, I feel. A lot of the time it does feel good and you do still get some pretty sweet chains, as you can see, and the DPS on Essence Drain is also still pretty damn sweet, especially since, as I mentioned, I decided to build this into a maximum DPS sort of thing. But overall, the Contagion chains just aren't as good as they used to feel, and I kind of need more out of Essence Drain at this stage of the league to be able to enjoy playing it for multiple days and levels and maps even. So I did get a fair amount of enjoyment out of it, but it just wasn't one of my favorites this league by any stretch of the imagination. Especially when you factor in that Essence Drain hasn't really changed since last time I played it either. There is some different content, like breaches for example, to take on, and the breach bosses, and also I never really got too much Guardian and Shaper stuff done on my last Essence Drain. But overall, it's still Essence Drain, nothing's really changed. It's the same thing that it has been for quite a long time, and it may very well see a shake-up in the next major patch when double dipping and all that sort of shit gets changed. It may even just see too much of a nerf to be playable ever again. So that could be very much an issue, and I want to kind of touch on that in another video. But the delirium and the poison scaling should be a lot worse and potentially just kill the single target for Essence Drain. So that will be a big deal, and that will very likely make Essence Drain a lot shitter if the changes that they said to compensate for DPS aren't good enough. In any case, right now, Essence Drain, this is with the both Delirium and Poison, and it's pretty sweet damage, as you can see. My Essence Drain ended up hitting something like a 72k tooltip because I really didn't go for very much energy shield in the end, especially while dual wielding. So dual wielding with Poison, the damage is pretty damn sweet, and it's the highest Essence Drain I've ever had by far. But that said, you don't really get to utilize Poison very often in these endgame fights. As you can see in the Guardians I'm going to be killing here, only really Shaper is the big sort of boss that you can stand still and chain Essence Drains over and over again to stack that poison, because the poison is based off of the initial hit of Essence Drain. So the faster you cast, the more you cast, the better your poison's going to be. But most of these fights really kind of want you to run around and dodge shit as an Essence Drain character, since you can't just stand there and leech a whole bunch of shit. Sure, you could run Vile Discipline and then you can stand still for a few seconds, but it's still usually not going to be enough time to kill any of these guys. So the damage is pretty good, and the playstyle of it isn't too bad, and it is fairly comfortable by all means. You're still just going to be fairly safe, and the damage is alright, so they will die eventually, but it's not insta-kill. It's not one of the most overpowered things out there at the moment. It's just a nice, comfortable, fairly smooth playstyle and skill, but it's certainly not anything worth nerfing right now, though it probably will be. In any case, this is what Chimera looks like. As I said, fairly smooth. He is poison immune, so there's no reason to even wear my Consuming Dark here, and realistically you should just put on a shield for a lot more energy shield gains, but I couldn't be bothered doing that, so I still did him with like 7k ES, and it's an extremely smooth and safe fight as Essence Drain. For Minotaur, however, it's a little tougher for Essence Drain because you really don't want to be standing around and tanking him basically ever. So you do have to utilize the entire arena to fight him, and that means a lot of running around and doing laps of the area, which, you know, can be pretty bad if he attacks very fast, or if he runs very fast, or if he has good area, meaning he'll fill up the arena a lot quicker with his attacks. You know, ultimately I did end up making a mistake here while still trying to survive him, but you portal in and out, and you know, you don't necessarily Whirling Blade and do something else like a Lightning Warp, and it's a fairly safe fight too. He was a bit tougher on the map mods as well. Hydra though, nothing too impressive here. You know, cannot be poisoned, so you do rely a fair amount on the delirium as well as just a really high essence drain tooltip. This one, however, had enfeeble, so it still dies fairly quickly. It's just kind of a boring fight. You apply your essence drain like once every 5 seconds. It's really not much more that you can do, because it's just delirium and essence drain. That's all there is to it, and then run around in circles. This is Shaper though. As I said, this is where we really get to see our beefy single target come to life. It's the first real time you get to stack Wither on the boss, and then also just chain essence drains, and he dies pretty damn quick. That is some serious essence drain DPS, and I'm not sure I've ever seen him die that fast to essence drain. But the ads are kind of a nuisance. You definitely need a delirium weapon for this, so I was potentially going to play around with Breath of the Council, as it gives the highest theoretical DPS based off of poison stacking and all that, but it's not really practical for most of these things. The delirium is far more applicable for things like the ads, which will die a lot faster thanks to delirium, and just because you run around so often, chances are you're not really going to be poison stacking that often, so you definitely need the delirium for the ads. For Shaper himself, a Breath of the Council will be better, but you're not going to quick swap between two weapons during the fight, and it's not really a big deal otherwise anyway. So Shaper, actually pretty damn smooth on essence drain. As we all know, it's a good hardcore Shaper farmer, and if you mess up with 7k ES like I do right here, well, it becomes a bit of a stalemate. But the DPS with this full DPS setup, still not completely mind-blowing for a Shaper, but definitely better than I've ever seen for an essence drain character. And then we come across Uber-Utsiri, which is pretty damn easy for all of the boss fights. They don't really put up much of a fight, especially when you have Blasphemy Temp chains, but the biggest problem is the ads. Clearing trash on this build with essence drain, or this specific build that I was playing, you know, with a pretty damn low ES. I rarely used a shield. That was kind of tough for the trash phases, and I don't recommend being this low on energy shield. As a matter of fact, I pretty much just don't recommend doing what I did, wearing Skin of the Loyal for the entire essence drain setup. As well as that, Corruscating Elixir. It was manageable. I did die plenty. I do mildly regret doing it. I wouldn't really recommend you guys do it as well, unless you really want to see the biggest, fattest essence drains like I did on this character, because that's all there really is to it. It's just a lot of DPS, but the playstyle definitely suffers because of it. So that's basically all the bosses, and I'll go over what the character is right now. So right off the bat, I will say, as you know, I was using a Corruscating Elixir for this, and a Skin of the Loyal, just to get the maximum amount of damage out of it. The +1 gems gets you the Essence Drain, and Empower eventual 2 extra levels, which is a pretty huge boost in damage. But overall, after playing this character for a few days, I don't think it's really worth it. You can do this and replicate the exact sort of items and build I did, but overall, if you're going to play this, I do think Shav's Low Life is a lot stronger just for the playstyle. You'll lose a bit of damage, but it'll be a lot more enjoyable just to map with the character. So the Scion version as Low Life, I do still think is very powerful, and I recommend that compared to Occultist. It just depends whether or not you want to take deal with the explosions that the Occultist is going to have, sometimes stopping your chains, and it's probably going to be pretty damn annoying with the current area of contagion. So as I mentioned, Scion gives you a good buff for your damage in Occultist, as well as some good utility from Deadeye with the additional projectile and pierce, and then saves you a few points by starting over here, and overall gives you a few good passives. So it is a nice flexible build for Essence Drain as a Scion. But like I said, Corruscating, especially as a non-Pathfinder, not particularly worth it. It's fairly uncomfortable, though it can be done. It's just it will get you killed every now and again when you forget certain situations exist or when you just can't sustain it any longer. And the next thing I'll say is that the dual wielding that I was doing is not necessarily all that worth it. So for most of the content, I should say anyway. So a lot of the time I was mapping with 7k ES, and that's really not that much as an Essence Drain character, since you're not regenning or recharging your ES quite as efficiently as a Life Leech based character would. So 7k ES, I did get by most of the time in endgame maps, but it's not terribly comfortable, and you do probably want to just wear a shield instead quite a lot of the time. Hitting 10k ES is not too unrealistic on a character like this as low life, and even with a Shavs, and it's what I would recommend doing most of the time. But when you're ready to get serious for single target, then yeah, I think a decay weapon and the poison definitely both go a long way. You can see, for example, what a decay weapon does in your damage over time, because the dot DPS on Path of Building here says 112,000 for our Essence Drain, while our decay DPS is 53,000. So that's an additional, 50,000 or 50% almost on top of your Essence Drain just out of nowhere, while the poison DPS is 161,000 per second, also out of nowhere basically. So if you don't have either of these, your single target's just 112,000. If you do have both of these, then you've like doubled, close to tripled your single target from one single cast. And then the more you stack with poison, the better your single target gets, of course. So decay, definitely something to look into if you haven't previously, which is an Essence of Delirium weapon. And poison, something you definitely want. If you're not using Consuming Dark, then you could very easily put a poison into your setup, probably over Rapid Decay, for example, and it's very valuable for your single target. But like I said, more often than not, you should be using a shield, just sometimes jumping into the dual wield for the maximum damage. And then this guy, I rarely felt like I needed to use this. The Path of Building says it's like 200,000 more overall DPS, just because it's really factoring in that poison scaling, but rarely, if ever, does that poison scaling actually kick in, because you don't really get to stand still too often. Beside that, there's not too much more to mention that you don't already know about this sort of character. As low life, we have Blood Magic attached to Discipline, and that puts us at low life for Pain Attunement to kick in. If you're unaware of that mechanic, that's 30% more spell damage. So over there we have Blood Magic attached to Discipline in this setup here. Our travel skill is faster attacks, Fortify, and Whirling Blades, and it's pretty quick when you're dual wielding. Our setup here for Contagion, all you really need is increased area and faster casting, and that's both just kind of quality of life, so you could even not have anything there if you really want, but that'll feel pretty bad, I will mention. The Stone Golem over here gives you 100 life regen per second, which gets converted to energy shield regen per second when you have Sorrow of the Divine up, so Stone Golem's pretty nice survivability for us. The Wither Totem setup, absolutely crucial for single target, so Wither attached to faster casting, increased duration, and Spell Totem really goes a long way in getting your damage up. And then lastly, our Blasphemy support attached to Vulnerability, Enlighten, and Temp Chains gives us the dual curse, and we do have to spec into a second curse up here. You could always go a third curse for Enfeeble, for example, and drop one of your rings, or if you're an occultist. As well as that, you could do Proj Weakness, but Enfeeble's probably better. Problem is, you'd then have to fit a third Blasphemy in somewhere, or self-cast Curse It, something like that. As far as the gear's concerned, you're just looking for Energy Shield pretty much everywhere as much as possible, specifically because we're wearing Skin of the Loyal, so the rest of our gear has to do some pretty heavy lifting. And we have the 80% chance to avoid being stunned enchant here, which is plenty because Temp Chains slows everything down. So stun never really felt like a big deal, but if it does, then just get an Eye of Chiula or even a Presence of Chiula. Since our amulet's pretty garbage anyway, it's just some quality of life for cast speed and some stats otherwise. Now, as I've mentioned, the main setup here is Essence Drain. We'll then say Controlled Destruction, into Void Manipulation. Most of the time we're running Pierce and then Slow Approach just for a swap on boss fights. Then we went Empower 4. If you can get an Empower 3, that's fine as well. And then a Rapid Decay. If you can't even get an Empower 3, then just run Slow Approach all the time. Slow Approach is probably better than Empower 3 most of the time anyway, so don't really feel too threatened by the Empower 3 or 4 because it's not necessarily that required anyway. All in all, that's basically the character, I believe. There's not too much else to mention. Essence Drain hasn't really changed. It's still pretty kind of fun for what it was, if you enjoyed it. Just look out for the next patch where Poison and Decay will probably get shit on, and if Essence Drain doesn't get compensated well enough, it might be a dead skill. That's it for this character, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.